Following interview contains commercial content. The products and services featured appear as paid advertising.
It's orthopedic care that's specialized just for kids. Dealing with an injury can be a stressful time for kids and their parents, but the experts at Shriners Children's Twin Cities offer a homey, welcoming place for kids to get the care that they need. Thanks for joining us today on Minnesota in Company. I'm your host, Jessica Fix, and joining me now from Shriners are Mary Aschenbrenner and Elise Fisk. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
So I know when kids get injuries, sometimes they can land on their growth plates, and that's kind of different than what an adult would deal with, correct?
Correct.
So let's kind of get into the basics of that and how that can affect kids and their healing process.
Sure. So the growth plate is a specialized area of tissue at the end of the bones, the long bones, and it's responsible for the longitudinal growth of the bones. So if a child injures a growth plate, it can cause the bone to grow abnormally or stop growth, and that can be a problem.
So, and then explain the difference between like an injury that an adult might have versus an injury that a kid would have, and why you guys treat them differently.
Well, it goes back to the growth plate. So
Yeah.
the adults have already reached their growth. They're done growing, so their growth plates are closed. Kids' growth plates are still open, and injuries can damage those growth plates. Angular deformities that we see in kids, such as in a fracture, depending on the kid's age and their growth potential, that can remodel without having to do anything in particular other than maybe casting. Whereas in an adult, that would not be the case.
And then Elise, can you tell us how Shriners really treats kids differently than what they might get if they went to any sort of orthopedic place?
Well, I think we have a really collaborative environment at Shriners. So we have our medical staff, obviously, to treat kids, but then we also have our rehab staff, and we have child life, and we have social work. So I think our clinic does a really nice job of just treating all aspects of the child and trying to make sure we're addressing everything that they need as best we can.
And I know like the child life specialists in particular, that's not something that you're going to get if you go anywhere.
Right.
They really are honed in on kids and what they need and
Yes.
helping make the process easier and less stressful for the kids.
Absolutely, especially as Mary was saying, like with a fracture, for casting, it can be really helpful just to have someone who has a degree in trying to help this child be less stressed and just make it as, the least amount of trauma for them as much as we can.
And then when a kid does get injured, there's usually some follow-up care involved too, right? Tell me
Yes.
about what that process looks like.
Usually we'll follow kids, especially if there is a growth plate injury, very closely. And as Mary was saying, if there's any sort of risk for the growth plate not growing anymore and causing shortening of the limb, or even like an angular deformity, meaning the bone's really bowed or something, then we need to follow those kids very closely and make sure that doesn't happen as best we can.
And when it comes to getting back into it with kids, whether it's sports or just biking, getting out there on their scooters, what is that? How do you guys make sure that they're going to be able to get back to the active lives that they want to lead?
Yeah, well, injuries, will sideline them from their activities for a while. And so they have the potential for losing some of their muscle mass and strength. So having our physical therapy available to help them with strengthening exercises, kids who are getting back into sports, going through a sports readiness program, also looking at just their techniques of the different things that they do in their sports and making sure they're using proper techniques to help them get back into their sport.
That's really key because maybe the way that they're kicking the ball needs to be tweaked a little bit,
Right.
and it'll prevent them from getting injured again.
Sure, yeah.
Is that something
Yeah,
that you kind of see?
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the misconceptions that people should know out there before we go?
I think the biggest one is that kids are not mini adults. So we don't treat them the same way. You have to go to someone who actually treats kids. So seeing a pediatric orthopedist is important just to make sure your child is cared for in the best way possible.
And then they get the care that they need, and then the parents have a little bit more relief and peace of mind, right?
Absolutely.
Mary, Elise, thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to tell everyone how they can get in touch with Shriners. So Shriners Children's Twin Cities is located in Woodbury. For more information, call 612-596-6100 or visit shrinerstwincities.org. We would like to thank Shriners Twin Cities for sponsoring today's interview.